Hello and welcome to SME TV. I'm your host, Angela Vithorkas. Sometimes we take the existence of businesses for granted. For most people, they just appear locally, or they are a brand, a major international retailer, or just big business. Whether it's a local small business or a large multinational homegrown brand, they all have one thing in common. They both need help. Keep watching to find out who does help. Please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel to support us and all SMEs. We encourage you to comment, tell us what you think, and share SME TV. Our guests today are Katherine O'Regan, Executive Director of the Sydney Business Chamber, and Peter May, Executive Officer of the CBD Sydney Chamber of Commerce. Hello and welcome.
Hello, Angela.
What I'm trying not to do is what I've written down here, which is Sydney versus CBD. So it's not a versus thing, just represent two very different areas of business in the city of Sydney.
Yep.
But also the Greater Sydney area.
Yes, yeah.
So we're not limited to that. The one big reason I wanted both of you here was because literally we can compare this relationship to almost match every other capital city in Australia.
Yeah, makes sense.
Which is very interesting to understand that we need the local businesses and what they face, and then what the bigger businesses and what they actually face, and that they are two sides of one coin.
Yeah, the interrelationships are amazing.
Exactly.
Yep.
Now, the difference here is that as the Sydney Business Chamber, you focus, Katherine, a lot on urban renewal, policies, reforming Sydney's local governance, planning reform, things like that. Peter, you're a lot more grassroots.
We're talking to small business, but SMEs represent, I think, 70 to 80% of the employed workers in the CBD. So it's a big pool of people.
I think it's closer to 84% on the last stats that I checked. So, but it is huge to think that there are so many local small businesses. You would think that CBDs in any state would just be mostly big business. But we're very high on professional services. We're very high in that category.
Professional services, high banking, finance, property, the law. But
can't get enough lawyers, right?
Yeah. Can't get enough lawyers. But there's a huge diversity. There's every business that you can think of. I mean, people tend to be very aware of the frontline businesses at the moment in terms of retail, hospitality, tourism, because they've been in the news a lot. But there are professional services who've also been facing some of the similar issues, and there's a lot of those in the middle. The gyms, the travel agents, the bars, all of those. It's wide-reaching.
So in a perfect world, we'd be having a discussion all about the different types of businesses that your memberships might represent. You've just touched on almost all the businesses that have been impacted by COVID right now. So let's jump straight ahead to that. Okay. So COVID-19 and this global pandemic descended on New South Wales and Sydney, just like every other state and capital city of Australia. And it affected both sides of the coin here. There was no one left out of this pain. No. So, Katherine, what have your members suffered or been impacted the most, do you think? Because some of their tenants are the small businesses.
Yeah, look, it's been a real mix, and it does depend on the sectors. Some members of ours who are in construction, they've actually kept the economy going, and they've kept projects going, which has been critical. They're very busy.
There's cranes galore in the city.
Yeah. And
workers out everywhere.
And it's fantastic in some ways because that whole sector has been able to almost accelerate some things, because while people are not in the city, now is a great time to get some of those works done, keeps those jobs happening, and it is really going to improve the amenity for the city when people start to return. So construction's been great. And sometimes the profile of the corporation has really then influenced what they've done. Some of the more conservative ones, like banks, are really good at risk profile, and they'll just close down. And they were one of the first to say, let's all work from home. But they're also one of the first to start getting their plans back, and so that people can come back to the workplace in a measured way. And they're doing the Team A, Team B transition.
Because they're used to such being so risk high in their categories, whether it's been cybersecurity risk or every other type of risk for them, they were better prepared than everybody else?
They definitely got the advantage.
Or they could absorb it?
Yeah, they definitely have mechanisms to manage risk, and they have those sort of emergency operation plans in place. So there was definitely even one firm I know that parked a lot of their employees, in their safe emergency zone, and the other ones were coming into the office. So they've got the soft infrastructure and the hard infrastructure to mitigate some of that risk.
We'll be looking to them to set the bar.
Yeah.
Because as we can see that this pandemic is not just a 1 or 2 month phase. There's no real end to it in sight. And even when there is, I think we've learnt some really good habits that we hope that we sort of keep up. Can't hurt to keep the flu numbers down anyway. So the social distancing could very well be something that does keep the doctor away, so to speak. It's as good as an apple.
And there's habits and there's also practices.
Yes.
Some businesses, now, we're all using that wonderful term of pivot, but there's definitely even one business I know in particular that have changed their whole business model. And this is a major corporation who've said they're actually in furniture. And they're saying actually food, because is now becoming a stronger component of their sales because they've changed it from a sit-down dining to a takeaway and keep shopping. And so they'll keep modelling that post-COVID.
Because they've seen that there's a good growth potential in the pivot. It's not a temporary pivot. Gin distilleries started making hand sanitizer.
Yeah.
I mean, it's alcohol, so
it helps.
Don't drink it. But they pivoted very quickly that way because they needed to. But they're going to go back to the gin.
Yeah.
So there's some of the pivots have produced something permanent and some less. Peter, what are you hearing from the small business community in the CBD as far as COVID goes? I mean, as a chamber, you're doing more virtual networking, which has been really good, by the way.
We've been probably busier, as you might expect, than ever. We've been speaking with as many members and others that we possibly can. We've been doing some innovation, I think, around the virtual networking area as opposed to just doing webinars. Webinars are useful, but a bit of two-way conversation is great.
Because we're isolated and we need the contact of some kind.
I think that's a really key thing about keeping connected. There's a lot that's been written about people's state of mental health and all those sorts of things. We'll leave that to the experts in that space. But, we have had feedback that said, look, people have really appreciated the fact that we've been helping them keep connected, as well as keeping some level on the flood of information which has been out there and trying to make sense of it for them at the same time.
And update them.
Yeah. So, as far as businesses go, look, it's a very mixed bag. I mean, there are some businesses who've done actually very well.
Silver lining.
And it could be because they've changed their business model, or it's because their business was in demand. For example, many of the non-bank lenders, not all, but many of the non-bank lenders have been particularly busy. Many of the lawyers have been particularly busy. Accounting people trying to make sense of JobKeeper and the rest of it for their clients. Some businesses have been able to move from their standard trade into a different level of trade. And then you've got others that we all have heard about who are just so exposed to the lack of visitors, international visitors, tourism, that their turnovers are...
They've gone, and there's no end in sight necessarily when they might resurrect. Katherine, you would be probably more conscious about that because we've always marketed Sydney as being a great tourism or leisure spot as a global destination. We can't do that now. So from your perspective, how do you see the role of the Sydney Business Chamber now moving forward? What are your goals going to be?
Yeah, we're doing a couple of things which has been targeted at some of those sectors. There's definitely a change from international tourism to domestic tourism. And we've been working with a member, and I'll tell a story, he'll be really proud. We all love the zoo, Taronga Zoo, or even the regional out at Dubbo. But one of the things I was talking to the CEO about just the other day is they have this wonderful corporate convention centre.
They do.
Beautifully launched end of last year. Sadly, empty space. But what they've been able to do is partner with an energy company, and it's currently converted to a call centre on a temporary basis because the energy company needed the space and they had the vacant space.
Because of what they've been going through.
What they've been able to do.
I mean, I know Taronga Zoo launched the hotel and the accommodation.
That's exactly, And so
great.
There's some ways that they've been thinking, okay, domestic tourism, and they're back open, which is great.
Yep.
And the foot traffic
holidays,
is coming
thank goodness.
through.
Yes.
And they've implemented all the COVID safe measures. So there has been ways particularly to keep some of that tourism sector alive. And we know that the hotels have also been able to, get some of the quarantine measures in place. Yes. So others have closed down. That's fine, and that's their choice. Business.
Yes.
And others have said there's things that we can do to keep at least their revenue going, so their ramp-up period is a lot shorter than coming from a standing start for when things really.
Well, that's the big difference, isn't it? Do you make the decision to shut down completely and then take time to phase in reopening? Because the bigger the organisation, the much harder that phase is.
Yeah.
Speaking about hotels, I've seen that some of them are offering their rooms on a daily day basis instead of a co-working space for those people that have been very conscious about, social distancing and not wanting to be in that co-working close contact proximity. They're letting them hire out the rooms for the day so they can do their Zoom calls there, have a lie down, watch a movie, use the mini bar and then go home.
Much better.
So I don't know if that's a workation. I don't know what that is. But it's an interesting way of them getting some revenue, keeping everyone employed or the minimum, just to keep it ticking over because, it's like parking a car for months on end and never turning over the engine. It's not good.
It's thinking about space in a different way.
It is.
And I'll just mention the other sector which is really part of the Sydney economy, and that's the university sector.
Oh, yeah.
And there's been, a significant impact both from the overseas student pipeline, and that's almost 70% of some of their revenue. The government funding for universities has been declining for many years, and the dependency on student revenue has been growing, and that's therefore going to impact not just their teaching but their research.
And their long-term financial plans because they do plan 5 and 10 years forward or 20 years forward, particularly for any of their build.
Exactly. And then this impacts, some of your members because the supply chain from all the university functions to all the small businesses and other hotel operators, all of that.
Food. I mean, if you look at from a small business perspective, if you look around Spice Alley up across the road from UTS, it's been decimated.
Because if they're reliant on that, I mean, the CBD of Sydney has 600,000 people that come into it every day, technically, at its normal peak, that come in for work purposes or to shop or spend the day. That's 600,000 every day. They're not coming in. The place is not full. The buildings aren't full. The issues with social distancing and using elevators and how many staff can be in the lift and having to program and scale and stage your entry and exit of staff. Once they're in the building, they won't be able to come out and go to the local shops. It is almost just too hard to imagine that being done on a big scale. It's okay if you're a small business and you're, straight open out onto the street. But do you see your role in the chamber changing? Do you see the chamber's role changing because of this? Or
I think what was happening is that to think about our functions in a far more clear, purest way, often we would be holding a function, face to face. So we have also moved to a digital platform, but think that what we're really also trying to do is advocate, influence and connect.
Yes.
But like any business, we need to think about doing those better or doing them to different degrees. It's definitely been dialing up the influence advocacy component. And yesterday we just launched a planning paper. How can we reform the plans and the planning framework in this city to really make a difference? There's been some great changes that have happened quickly because of COVID, whether that's actually the business hours that people can operate, whether it's using public space in a different way. Do you need a license? Freeing up that red tape has been fantastic. But there's also, to get back to almost the construction development, let's try and make that happen faster. And some of that will also start to feed jobs and feed the economy as it starts to recover.
Because it's the long term, it's the long game. Right?
Yeah.
We don't want to say that we can't plan anything moving forward. We have to.
Yep.
We have to make certain assumptions. Things will become the new norm. I really detest that saying, but there will be a new norm. We need to allow for that and factor that in as we go. We don't want to shut up shop and not have anything keep going. And the lesson to learn is, can we streamline these processes anyway so that the future is easier and better for big business and small business to slot in, right, and keep it all going. I think that's a big lesson that we've learned, is that we waste so much time on sweating the little things in terms of bureaucracy, whether that's private or public, and that we're suddenly realising now we really don't need that step.
And that was one of the subtitle for the planning papers. Let's not wait to the next pandemic to make these changes. We've proven that we can do them faster and we've proven that some of this little stuff really probably was a drag on the economy, drag on our social well-being, drag on public amenity. We can do it.
A waste of time and money from everybody's game.
Yeah.
And even the bureaucrats who often have to tick another box and go through another process have been just as frustrated by those processes over the years, and freeing them up to a certain degree. I mean, lots of small business owners that we speak to are quite excited about moving forward and re-energising themselves in their business. You know, sometimes you take for granted the daily grind and I've got to do this. Now we have to have a different attitude, and it's almost forced some of us to regenerate.
I think there's been a mindset change over the last couple of months by everybody. I think the first month to 6 weeks of what we started to endure, people didn't know what was going to happen, and there was a lot of depth and depression
and
going
I'm
out
happy
there.
to say I was very anxious.
And there's still a lot of those underlying challenges out there, don't get me wrong. But, we've seen new businesses launch out of existing businesses or from nowhere. And we have to be positive. We have to find new ways of doing things. And to Katherine's point, places like the state government, the City of Sydney, I mean, they've actually moved very quickly in terms of trying to make these changes so that people can get on and do things.
You snooze, you lose, Peter.
Absolutely.
And even government at all levels has started to realise this.
And some of the things that we as a chamber have traditionally done, like face-to-face activities, they will come back, we hope. But I think the virtual activities will keep going because there's a place for them. There's a place for a blended model.
Because we've had fun doing them.
But there's people
and
who
we can.
There's
Yes,
people who actually engage better in that environment than they do face-to-face.
Well, I've even just the few that I have attended, and one in particular with the the CBD chamber, I found that the interaction and the engagement was better and easier because someone said really quickly they heard someone talking about their service or their product and went, I can help you with that. You wouldn't do that in a networking event because you may never have gotten to speak to that person or hear their 1 or 2 minute pitch. So I found, having gone through that process, I went, oh yeah, I really like that. But, I don't know if the big end of town has had the benefit of being able to do that.
So I think what we've been doing is the online forums we've been having is you might have a minister, like we actually had the housing minister with us yesterday, and there's a lot more listening going on with the minister because there's a question coming from one versus the other. It's not my role as to say everything. It's let's get the members the chance, and they're actually I think asking directly questions that they wouldn't have. And
less intimidated maybe on Zoom than being in the room.
Yeah.
Wow, let the politicians beware.
Yep. And they're listening and going,
Well, you've got functions like the chat box, and you can throw something in there, and you've got to encourage people to use those things.
Yep.
Use the technology that's there, and people I think are warming to it, really, really well. Look, I'd like to think that from a small business perspective, small business people in the city crave connection. That is how many of them develop collaborative opportunities or new business opportunities. They haven't had that now for so long, but they are beginning to find that same opportunity through some of these platforms.
They're being more strategic. They're having the opportunity to work on their business as opposed to in it. For some of them, they may have some limitations, but they don't. They've tried to expand others. I mean, that's the very nature of an SME. Anxiety breeds a solution. You throw a problem at an SME and, they'll lose sleep till they find the answer to it, and they're fluid enough and nimble enough and small enough to be able to do that fast if they come up with an idea. Generally the big end of town is much more sluggish in a reaction to something, but we've seen, as you've said, Katherine, we've seen them pick up speed and momentum.
It's almost they're now in action mode, and I think they're liking the digital platforms because it's 1 hour out of their life. Rather than if they're actually coming to a physical function, travel time or anything, it's just not going to happen. So we're actually reaching more people because it might still be the one member corporation, but there might be 4 people who've come rather than just the CEO.
That's right. It's not limited now to one appearance, and that's sort of spreading the love, if you will, and having more engagement from their side on what they're doing and how they're involved with other things. Peter, I just want to remind everyone that you built the CBD Business Chamber from zero.
Well done, Peter.
It was something that was sorely in need of for years, which I used to mention all the time. Why don't we have one in the city? And then lo and
We've got one
behold,
now.
so single-handedly you've built up that chamber, and you've noticed, I think, more than anyone else in the city, exactly some of the problems the businesses have experienced, how hard they work. And I think our small business sector, particularly in the CBD, you know, is something to be proud of, not just our range, but also our tenacity. And, you know, I think we'd rival sort of, I'm going to say that we're better than any other state. I'm going to put that out there. I'm happy to say that.
Well, we're also,
I know I'll get some feedback from Melbourne and Brisbane, but
it's also more competitive because we have so many small businesses in the CBD. I mean, I think we are the largest concentration of SMEs in Australia.
Correct.
So there's a lot of competitive spirit there. But you know what? At the moment, what we've seen is a number of those competitive walls come down and people talking to each other. And I'll give you a quick example of that. You know, when things began to relax a little while ago in the hospitality trade, we were on a call, 15 or 16 of our members, and one said, are you going to open on Friday, Saturday and the weekend? It was the long weekend.
Yeah.
And the person said, look, I'm going to open Thursday, Friday lunch, but I'm not going to do the weekend. And said, well, actually, we're opening, so he said, well, maybe I can pass my people who inquire about a booking to my place over to you.
and that wouldn't have happened before.
It wouldn't have happened before.
It wouldn't have happened before. Katherine, without putting you on the spot, you mentioned planning reform.
Yeah.
Is that the one thing right now, if you had a magic wand, you'd change? You'd fast track that?
We've got to think about jobs. One of the things that we keep hearing is that, in previous recessions, and we can learn from this, is it's about the economy getting better, but that actually means jobs have to get better. So my focus has been very much, how do we get jobs working? Pulling the planning lever is definitely one. We've done a lot of work, and I know
Because it's a big sector.
It's a big sector, so we can get things to happen faster or actually with less compliance costs, so bottom line changes, and they might be big projects or they might be small projects. We can actually start to think about the nighttime economy. I know you both are big advocates around that, because people during COVID can work now 24 hours, and we could be a 24-hour global city.
That is a whole other subject on the work hours, because we're all finding that there's no 8 or 10 hour
There's
day.
no.
There's a 12 to 20 hour day somewhere in there.
Yeah, and the
You're absolutely
planning
right. We're changing
regime.
everything.
Yeah, planning regime is all centred around 8 till 6 for some strange reason. So if you want to now come into the office for half a day from 10 till 2, you should be able to do that. Or if you want to work through till 8 o'clock at night, you should be able to get out and get some healthy food, but you can't.
No.
So I'm sort of answering your question. Planning does control a lot of that, but then you think about how can we make jobs. That's what I'm focused
But
on.
without the benefit of our viewers to understand that planning encompasses more than just a one-off construction project. The jobs that brings about, the other businesses that it generates, it's not just the subbies. It's so many layers on that the planning reform, which is one of the biggest things any level of government can look after and not only fast track but plan for themselves better opportunities moving forward. It's a very serious situation.
It controls every aspect
It
of our
does
life.
control every aspect of life. Clearly it's going to control the Sydney Chamber for a while as well.
It does.
Peter, what about you? If you could wave one magic wand for the small businesses or the SMEs in the CBD, what would you do? Oh, and I didn't prepare him first.
That's a tough question.
Yeah, but you're talking to them. Is it streamlining some of that red tape for them too? Is it them not having access to?
Absolutely, but there has to be confidence that the businesses can come back.
Yeah.
That's one of the big challenges I think that are being faced at the moment. Businesses have heard about the opportunity to pivot.
Yes.
But there are a number of issues which are still up there, which are really forcing them to ask themselves the question, well, do I have a business to pivot? So how do you get around that? Well, yes, we've got to get around some of the red tape. We've got to get over some of the property issues.
The hurdles.
That exist. Ideally, we need to have some people in the city, whether they be university students at one end of town or tourists from anywhere in Australia.
Numbers and members. Everybody needs it. And on that note, and thank you for mentioning the word confidence, because it's on the bottom line of this video right now. Business confidence. Yes, thank you very much for that. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it very much.
Pleasure.
To our viewers and watchers, please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel to support us and all SMEs, where you'll find more great interviews, and please share, like and comment. A huge thank you to the SME Association for making SME TV and podcast channel possible, and to Piedmont Studio for the great production. To reach us with any content ideas, comments or stories that are good for your business community, you can email us, news@smea.org.au, and we're on all the socials too. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.